All right, we out of 2 Samuel or 1 Samuel, and we're moving into 2 Samuel tonight. It's just a recap. It's sort of a continuation. Remember in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel that Saul and Samuel had told him, Samuel had come back through the witch of Endor and told him that he would not win the victory, and he did not win the victory, and him and his sons, 3 of his sons got killed. But we'll see here that there's still a lot of questions that we thought maybe was answered and straightforward. It's not. We see here that as we come into chapter 1, that Saul still has a son that's living. And it's natural for a king, if he has a son, it's natural for one of his sons to succeed him in his kingship. And we're going to see, talk about that some tonight. We're also going to see that Jonathan also had some sons that were living, and is it possible that some of them could try to rise and take over the throne? And we know when you have a conflict like this, and you have 2 different groups that's trying to come together to take over a certain country, you can have what they call a civil war. We know we had a civil war in the United States of America at one time, where there was 2 different groups that was fighting over 2 different things. And so we're going to look tonight, but we're also going to see David is back in the picture, because Samuel had went and picked out David. God showed him that David should be the king. But I want you to see that even though God might have a plan for you, it might not come about in the time frame that you think it would come about. And David was willing to wait on the Lord. We'll see that David had 2 opportunities to take Saul's life. But because Saul was the man that God put back in the throne, he refused to take matters into his own hands. He decided that it would be God that would take Saul out and not him. Now we're going to see that David, and surprisingly so, is going to be very sad to learn that Saul and Jonathan died. Now we can understand him being sad about Jonathan, because we know Jonathan was his best friend ever. But to see that he was saddened at the death of Saul, you have to realize that he was part of the family. He married Jonathan's sister, Michal, and we see that he was so close to him that even though Saul tried to kill him many times, he still looked at Saul as God's anointed. He was the king. He was the king that he knew. You remember as a young boy that Saul would come and he would play music to soothe Saul's heart when he got anger. So he had a deep relationship with that. So I want you to focus on that sometimes when we have every reason to be mad or upset with somebody, that we can get past that and look and do the right thing that God would have us do. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1, now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag. All right, let's pause there. You remember when David was staying in Philistine, and you remember David was asked the king Achish for a place of their own at Ziklag, and you remember that Achish wanted him to go and battle Saul and them in the battle, but the other generals that was part of the Philistine group did not trust David and his men, and so they stood up against Achish and says, no, we don't want him to go, because it wouldn't be good for Israel to be in front of us and David to be back at the back, and then they come together and we'd be caught in the middle. So Achish had to send them home, and when they got back home, you remember what happened? What happened? They were burned out, and their wives and their children were gone. And so it says here, when it was talking about he returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, when they went to even the score, they did even the score. And so they went and got their possessions back. You remember they got their wives back, got their children back. They hadn't killed them, they just took them. And it came even to pass on the 3rd day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth and did obeisance. Now, this guy undoubtedly knew David, and he'd been out there and he was in a bad way, and he came to David and sought David out, and I don't know what he was going to expect would happen with the news that he was going to tell David. I think he thought that David would be happy about what he was going to tell him, but you'll find out that David's not. And David said unto him, From whence comest thou? And he said unto him, I've come out of the camp of Israel, and I have escaped. Am I escaped? And David said unto him, How went the matter? See, David was so busy fighting the Amalekites, getting his possessions back, getting the women back, he hadn't even had time. You couldn't turn on Fox News back then now. Y'all know that. You couldn't turn on and get the news, so he hadn't had any way at all to find out how the battle went. And so David said unto him, How went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered to him that the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also. So we know from reading that the guy knows that there's a special relationship between Saul and Jonathan, because he knows that, because he didn't say anything about the other two sons being dead, but he says Saul and Jonathan are dead also. And David said unto the young man that told him, How knowest that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? He said, How do you know this? Did somebody tell you, or did you see it? How do you know? And the young man that told him said, As I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear. And lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me. And he called unto me, and I answered, Here am I. And he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. Let's stop there for 1 second. So we know that Saul was wounded. And we knew that he had his sort of bodyguard that was with him. You remember he asked his bodyguard to take the sword and run through him, because I'd rather die by your hands for them to come and kill me. And his bodyguard says, No, nay, I will not dare lay a hand on the king's anointed. So he would not do that. But we read lastly that Saul fell on his own sword to kill himself. And that when the bodyguard had saw that Saul had fell on his own sword to kill himself, what did the bodyguard of him, or his armor bearer, as the Bible calls him? What he did, he fell on his sword also. Now, this guy that's coming by is saying that Saul's not dead. That Saul fell on his sword, but yet he did not kill himself. And that he looked behind and saw him and called, and the Amalekite's going to say, Here am I. Now, here's something else to remember. You remember in the Samuel when we were reading about the Amalekites? I'm testing your knowledge and see if you paid attention when I taught you. You remember when they were fighting the Amalekites? And you remember when Saul fell out of favor with God? You remember he told him to kill the Amalekites and to kill them all. But Saul let the king live. As he let the king live, he let a few others live also. They got away. Do you notice here who came by? Amalekite. If Saul had done what God had told him to do to start with, we wouldn't be here and talking about this in the Bible. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what's going to happen, but I want to make that point to refresh in your mind how if you really study the Bible and get in between there and stuff, all of this will come to light and say, yeah, he should have done what God told him to do. Now, can I say this for a minute about you? What about you? Has God told you to do something, and how are you doing? Have you done anything that you think in your life that might not be right? That you might have to think twice about what you've done? And you might have to look at God and say, God, I'm sorry. That was not right what I've done. And have you ever thought about that you need to sort of make it right? You know, and this is where Saul, he messed up, and God was not pleased. I want you to see, God was not pleased with Saul because he did not obey what he done. Now, the biggest thing I tell you all the time is to follow the 2 commandments. What are the 2 commandments? To love God with what? All your heart, all your mind, all your soul. I'm going to tell you enough till you finally get it now. You won't have to be waiting for me to tell you. What's the 2nd commandment? Love thy neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Everybody. And you should not treat them harsh in any way. People make mistakes at times, but if they make mistakes, we don't just chew them out and spit them out. We try to show them their mistakes and try to help them get to a better place, because we can destroy a person with our words. And so we have to be able to go to them and do a correction if there's a correction to be made, but we have to do it in a way that we don't just destroy a person. And Saul, because he did not do what he said, God told him to do, then that day he fell out of favor with God. And he said unto me again, stand, I pray thee, upon me. This is what the Amalekites said Saul told him. And he said unto me again, stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me. For anguish is come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. The Amalekite is saying Saul's not dead. And Saul is begging this Amalekite to please finish the job. Please go ahead and kill me. So the Amalekite telling David all this, and I don't know what he thought David was going to think of this, but you'll see if you've read ahead, you already know. So he said, I stood upon him, and I slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that. He was fallen. See, he was severely injured. So he said, David, I did a good thing. I just put him out of his misery. I did. And so I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and I have brought them hither unto my Lord. Now, he really thought in telling David all this that, hey, David's going to be proud of me. Saul been trying to kill him for all these times, and now I finally finished that job and got rid of Saul, and I've took the crown because David, he should be king, and here I've brought the king's crown to him and all that. Then it says when he told him that David took hold on his clothes and he rent them. He tore his clothes. What would cause a man to take his clothes and tear them? Severe anguish. He was just beside himself in grief. And it says that David took his clothes and rent them. And likewise, all the men that were with him, when they saw David and the misery and the grief that he bestowed, it said, likewise, the men that were with him did the same thing, and they tore their clothes and just began to cry and began to mourn. And it says in verse 12, and they mourned and they wept and they fasted until even for Saul and for Jonathan his son. Notice he said, not just for Jonathan, but for Saul also. And for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. Now, what would it have been like if David would have had to went on and fought? What would it have been like if David would have been caught in a situation where he would have had to fight against Israel with Achish? Because that's what Achish had asked him to do, and that's what David and his men went to do. We don't know if David would have got out there and turned and fought against Philistines at the period of time, or whether he would have honored King Achish, who'd been real good to him, and tried to do that. I would not think he would have killed Saul or Jonathan. We know he wouldn't have done that, but he might would have fought and tried to help where he could. We don't know, but God got him out of that situation. Can I say that God might have got you out of some situations too? I have found that sometimes, rather than be hasty in words, I've learned this as a pastor, and I've learned this the hard way. Sometimes it's better to pray about a situation than to act upon a situation. Because I've learned that I need to be a little slower sometimes and give God a chance to work things out and spend time in prayer. And David said unto the young man that told him, whence art thou? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger and an Amalekite. And David said unto him, how wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Because David could say that because twice he had the opportunity, and David was afraid. And here you looked at the Amalekite, says, how were you not afraid? And David called one of the young men in his group and said, go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. David was not going to let him live. He just told him he killed the king, Saul. He come there bringing the crown, and they probably thought David was going to give him some dowry for everything that he did, but he got fooled. Now, David didn't do it himself. He called one of his young men and said, you go and take care of this matter. And David said unto him, thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth has testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. Verse 16 opens up a mystery. David said, I killed you because you said you killed King Saul. And if you lied to me, hoping to gain something extra from me because you thought I'd be glad about it, he said, thy blood will be upon your head, thy head. See, David not sure if he told him the truth or not. He did have the crown. He did have the other things from Saul. And David just says, if I killed you in error, don't blame me. He says, it's upon you because you said that you did these things. And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan, his son. And he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. Now, in this here, David begins to acknowledge how much Saul did good as a king. One of the things that Israel did not have that the Philistines had was metal tools to fight with. Swords, spears, things like that. They did not have a lot of them. So Saul, he taught them the use of the bow and arrow. And David's thinking of this, what a good thing that was Saul did. He taught us how to fight, how to defend ourselves. Because Judah, during that period of time, the children of Judah, he taught them period that they were able to defend themselves and fight very well. The beauty of Israel was slain upon thy high places, how the mighty have fallen. He says, tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised tribe. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon there to fields offers. For there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away. The shield of Saul as though he had not been anointed with oil. He is talking about the fasting and lamenting of the people over Saul, how they should not let any of this happen during that period of time because the king and his son has died. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. He was talking about what good warriors they were when they went out and fought. Till this battle, they were mighty in what they did. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives. And in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. You have to admire Jonathan. Even though he was David's friend, and even though he supported David in everything he did, and even though his daddy talked very harshly to him, Jonathan never turned his back on Saul. When Dad had to go out to battle, Jonathan was there. And don't think Jonathan didn't have Saul's back. If anybody tried to mess with Dad, you had to try to mess with me also. And that's admirable today for father and son to be able to get along. Even though they differed in aspects of what they thought, they still were able to put those differences aside and be able to achieve a lot of good. Ye daughters of Israel, he says, weep over Saul, who clothe you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in thine high places. And he says, I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. Now, Jonathan here, and many people like to add more into this than what should be added. And I'll just leave it like that. But Jonathan and David were just best of friends. I don't think you can understand the love that two men could have for each other and not go any farther than what God meant for it to happen, unless you could talk to some soldiers that go to war. And they're men that they got each other's back and how to look after. And there's a bond there for those men, and a love for those men, and a love for their fellow brother that you just can't describe. And David knew that Jonathan had his back and looked out for him. And he knew that he interceded several times against his own dad to make sure that he was looking after. And this is what he was talking about. He was talking about, I could always count on Jonathan, but I don't have a woman yet that I can truly count on like that. Now, David loved a woman. He had two wives, and at the time, you remember, he had Nabal's wife, and he had Michal, that was Saul's daughter. But he was just making a point there that Jonathan the love of him past any love any woman's ever had for me. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? So now we come to the point after they've spent time in mourning and fasting and lamenting over the death of Saul. We come to chapter 2, and now there's going to be a divided kingdom. In the divided kingdom, we're going to see that David is going to be made king over the southern tip of what is Israel now, Judah. But the rest of Israel, the northern part, that Ishabeth, which is the one remaining son of Saul, Abner, and I don't know if you remember who Abner was. Abner was the general for Saul's army. Somehow he survived the battle. And so Abner has granted God him and decided, I'm going to put Saul's son in charge, because he was still in charge of the remaining troops they had. I'm going to put him in charge of this northern part. But watch how it happened. And it came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord. That's important. When it come to the point that David had to decide what to do, David didn't just say, well, I'm going now. God's called me to be king. I'm going to take my kingship. It says he inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go up? And he said, unto Hebron. That's where you go. How many times do we ask God what to do before we do it? You don't have to answer that. Sometimes we act in haste. Sometimes it just pops in our minds, so well, I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to take care of this right now. But David, he never showed that. David always came and asked the Lord, Lord, what should I do? And God was always faithful to David to show him what he should do. We see that David now has asked God, what do I do now? Saul is dead. Am I supposed to go? And you want me to be king now, Lord? What do I do? So it says after he asked him and God told him to go up, that David went up thither. And his two wives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelite, and Abigail, Nabal's wife of Carmelite. And these men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were there that buried Saul. Now, David was glad. You remember they hung Saul and his sons on a wall, and these men went and took them down and gave them a burial. And so when David went into this area, they were told that these men were here. And David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, blessed be ye of the Lord, that you have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. Even though Saul was hated by some, he was loved by many. And these men loved him as their king, and they did the right thing. And David, even though he could have every reason to hate Saul, David was very honored that he did. And now the Lord, he says, show kindness and truth unto you. And I also will requite you this kindness, because you have done this thing. And in this here, he says he's going to repay them. That word requite means repay them. So I'm going to repay you for this kindness. Therefore now let your hands be strengthened and be valid, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. So he's telling them now that Saul is dead, I am the king, and I'm going to look after you. So here we see when civil war is going to start. But Abner, the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host, took Ishabeth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. Ishabeth was the youngest son of Saul, but he was about 40 years of age at this time when all this was taking place. Now, he would not have had the power to do this on his own, but with the general, Abner, who had a lot of power because he was the general of the whole army, and Abner was leading the way, so we come on, your dad's dead, we're going to put you as the king. And so they went forward to do that, and they made him king over Gilead and over the Asherites and over Jezreel and over Ephraim and over Benjamin and over all of Israel. That's the other 11 tribes that he was going to be at. And the Ishabeth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. And he reigned for 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. Up to this time, Saul was king over all of it. It was not a divided kingdom. It was a kingdom that was united. Can I say this real quick? And we'll see how this causes problems with a divided kingdom. But can you see what's happening in America? Even though we're not in a full-fledged civil war, can you see the divisions that we have? Could you imagine if everybody could get on the same page for the betterment of our country and for the betterment of people, how really good that the United States of America could be again? We're still better than ever in so many other places, but I see us falling down the whole time. I was just thinking the other day that every time they have a vote, it's never any bipartisanship hardly. One party sticks together and votes this way, and the other party almost completely sticks together and votes that way. And what we need is to work together for the betterment of the country instead of having an agenda to go. And we see here that Israel was in the same thing. You had a certain group that followed David. You had a certain group that was following Ishabeth at the time. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. And Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishabeth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met together by the pool of Gibeon, and they sat down, the one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. Now get this picture of what's about to happen. There was division between David's people and Ishabeth's people. So Abner, who is the general for Ishabeth, and Joab, who's the general for David, came together. Joab was the son and Abner there. They came together and they were at this place. And it says, we need to settle this division among us. But we don't all need to fight. Let's just select a group.
And there was